There's something deeply paradoxical about the very question of how to escape manipulation. The instant you begin to worry about being controlled, you've already surrendered to the frame of control itself. That fear makes you reactive, and the reactive mind is easy to lead. You see, manipulation isn't simply about what others do to you. It is about the invisible agreements you've already made without noticing. Every time you crave approval, defend an image, or rush to correct how others see you, you've become a participant in their design. The manipulator doesn't have to chain you. They only need to convince you that your freedom is something they can give or take away. And in that moment you start performing, behaving not from awareness but from expectation. Most people live this way without realizing it. They confuse compliance with harmony, attention with love, guilt with conscience. Society rewards obedience disguised as virtue, and we grow addicted to that reward. But here's the quiet secret. The manipulation only works when you forget to observe it. The moment you watch the pattern rather than react to it, it loses its hypnotic power. Awareness itself is the great disruptor. It turns every psychological chain to dust because it no longer resists or obeys. It simply sees. To truly escape manipulation is not to fight the manipulator, nor to armor your mind with suspicion. It is to understand that what they control are your unexamined impulses. The hunger to belong, the fear to be alone, the need to be right. When you bring light to these corners, the invisible strings dissolve. The game collapses not because you've won, but because you've stopped playing. Manipulation never truly starts from the outside. It begins in the silent corners of your own conditioning, the patterns of fear, guilt, and desire that were planted long before you ever met a manipulator. Every emotional trigger is an open door. Whoever learns to knock on it can walk straight into your mind. When someone presses on your fear of rejection, you bend. When they touch your guilt, you justify. When they promise to satisfy your desire, you obey. This is the true captivity, not the control itself, but the unconscious reflex that responds to it. Most people think freedom is about resisting others, but real freedom begins by observing how easily you can be pulled. Your reactions are ancient programs running beneath awareness, scripts taught by family, culture, religion, and survival. They whisper, be liked, be good, be safe. And so, without realizing it, you edit yourself to fit the narrative others approve of. The manipulator doesn't create your prison, they simply rearrange the furniture inside it. To break free, you must begin to study the architecture of your own reactions. Watch the moment a word, a glance, or a tone stirs emotion in you. That flash of heat or shame is not weakness. It's a signal revealing where you are still bound. When you can see the pattern without defending it, the chain begins to loosen. Awareness is not resistance, it's clarity, and clarity dismantles control from within. The manipulator's greatest power is your blindness to the mechanics of your own mind. Once you learn to observe rather than identify, the spell dissolves. No one can control what is self-aware. The secret, then, is not to harden yourself against influence, but to know yourself so intimately that no influence can enter unnoticed. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit theater watching a puppet show. The strings glimmer faintly in the light, and you can't help but smile because you see how the trick works. The puppets twist, dance, and argue, but you know every gesture is pulled from above. There's no mystery in their drama because you can see the hands that guide them. Now imagine one of those puppets suddenly believing it moves on its own. It feels pride when it bows, shame when it stumbles, anger when another puppet steals its spotlight. It doesn't realize that the same fingers move them both. This is the human condition, a stage filled with performers who think they're re-improvising while repeating lines written by invisible forces. Those strings are not physical. They are psychological. They are made of fear, approval, belonging, and memory. When someone praises you, they pull a string. When they threaten to withdraw affection, they pull another. And you move, convinced you're acting from free will. The tragedy is not that you are controlled. It is that you don't even notice the control, because you mistake reaction for choice. Every time you feel compelled to defend, to explain, to prove, a string is being pulled. Yet the moment you see it, truly see it, something miraculous happens. The puppet awakens. The movement continues, but the attachment to movement dissolves. The hands may still pull, but you no longer dance unconsciously. You become both puppet and observer, watching the mechanism of influence without fear or resistance. Freedom isn't about cutting the strings, it's about recognizing that they were never truly separate from you. The awareness that witnesses the movement is already free. The puppet only suffers when it believes it's real. Once it sees the hands, it laughs, because it realizes the entire show was never against it, only a mirror revealing how deeply asleep it was. Most people drift through life in a kind of collective trance, hypnotized not by a single manipulator, but by an entire social machinery built on subtle coercion. From the moment we are born, we're conditioned to trade authenticity for belonging. A child quickly learns that a smile earns approval, that silence avoids punishment, and that agreement ensures love. What begins as survival becomes a lifelong performance. Society rewards the obedient mask and punishes the raw face beneath it. You're told that to be accepted, you must polish your edges, suppress your instincts, and recite the sacred script of normality. This is not education, it's indoctrination disguised as virtue. We're taught to mistake approval for love, applause for meaning, and conformity for peace. The result is a civilization of actors, each performing for an invisible audience, terrified of breaking character. We call it fitting in, but it's closer to spiritual amnesia. You start believing the costume is your skin. This is the invisible religion of our age. Not worship of gods, but worship of perception. Likes replace prayer, attention replaces intimacy, and reputation becomes salvation. And yet beneath all this noise, there's a quiet awareness that knows it's all theater. You can feel it every time you say yes, but mean no. Every time you smile while your soul goes silent. That ache is your spirit remembering its original freedom. But most people can't face it. They drown it out with distraction, gossip, ambition, or the constant chase for validation. The manipulative system doesn't need tyrants when it has self-policing minds. We've internalized the voices of power so deeply that we police ourselves, dreaming we are free. True awakening begins when you stop confusing obedience with peace and realize that harmony achieved through suppression is just a prettier form of slavery. The moment you notice the trance, even slightly, the spell begins to crumble, because awareness cannot be hypnotized. The trance begins to shatter the moment you see the pattern for what it is. It's not a dramatic awakening, no thunder or revelation, just a subtle click inside your awareness, a quiet recognition that you've been chasing approval, mistaking dependency for connection. You realize manipulation doesn't survive in awareness, it only thrives where there is need. The manipulator feeds on your hunger for validation, your fear of rejection, your craving to feel seen. Once you stop seeking nourishment from their approval, the entire power dynamic collapses. It's astonishingly simple. They never had control. Your need did. Every emotional hook in your life is built on something you believe you lack. When you think you need someone to confirm your worth, you hand them the key to your emotions. When you depend on external peace, you live in permanent negotiation with your own freedom. But the moment you turn your gaze inward and observe this mechanism, the cords begin to dissolve. You see that most of what you've called love was dependency. Most of what you called respect was fear. And most of what you called trust was habit. The world hasn't changed, you have. The same people may still try to pull your strings, but their fingers meet air. You no longer dance, not because you resist, but because there's nothing inside you to grasp. Freedom doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from clarity. You stop being food for manipulation when you no longer hunger for approval. The manipulator's energy fades, because they depend on your reaction to exist. In silence, they have nothing to feed on. This is the first glimpse of psychological liberation, realizing that control vanishes the moment you cease to negotiate your worth. True independence is not isolation, it's inner sufficiency. When you no longer seek completion from others, their influence turns transparent. You see the strings, smile, and continue moving. But now, it's by choice, not command. You believe you are the one being manipulated, but that belief already hides the deeper illusion. that there are two separate players in this game. In truth, the manipulator and the manipulated are roles performed by the same fragmented mind. The ego is a master of disguise. It creates both the predator and the prey, the victor and the victim, because it needs conflict to feel alive. It seeks control while trembling at the thought of losing it. Every time you try to dominate, you are manipulated by your own fear of powerlessness. Every time you submit, you are ruled by the desire to be safe. It's a cycle that feeds itself endlessly, like a snake eating its own tail. The ego doesn't want peace. It wants drama, because only in friction does it feel real. It invents enemies to preserve identity. Without opposition, it dissolves. And this is the quiet secret behind all manipulation. It is not a battle between two minds, but a performance within one divided consciousness pretending to be two. The moment you see this, the whole theater flickers. You realize you are not the actor being controlled, nor the puppeteer pulling strings. You are the stage itself, the awareness upon which both appear and disappear. The ego's need for control belongs to the play, not to you. Let it act, let it scheme, but remain the observer behind the mask. When you stop identifying with either role, the energy of conflict evaporates. The manipulator loses its grip because there's no opponent left to push against. You see that the same fear that drives them once lived in you, the fear of being nothing without control. But when you rest as the silent witness, that fear becomes irrelevant. You no longer need to win or lose. The entire dynamic was just the ego arguing with itself, and you were never truly part of it. What remains is stillness, not indifference, but lucid detachment. You see the dance of control for what it is, a play of shadows projected on the screen of your awareness. When this understanding dawns, the landscape of human interaction changes completely. You stop seeing manipulation as a personal offense and begin to perceive it as a movement within a much larger choreography, a dance of unconscious minds trying to meet their own needs for safety, love, and significance. You realize that every act of control, every seduction, every attempt to induce guilt is born from the same source, fear of disconnection. The manipulator isn't truly an enemy. They are simply another form of you, acting out a forgotten wound in a different costume. Once this is seen, judgment dissolves. You stop fighting people and begin to study patterns. You start to notice the rhythm of the game, the push and pull, the masks and mirrors, and in that observation, you rise above it. Understanding the mechanism is the end of victimhood, because you can't be trapped by something you be recognized as a pattern of consciousness rather than an attack on your identity. The battlefield becomes a classroom. You no longer ask, "Why are they doing this to me?" But instead, "What is this moment trying to teach me about the nature of control itself?" That shift is everything. Suddenly, manipulation becomes transparent, almost mechanical. The guilt that once chained you becomes data. The flattery that once seduced you becomes noise. You see how the entire structure of human behavior runs on a shared illusion of separation, each person trying to dominate what they already are. It's like waves competing on the surface of the same ocean, unaware they rise and fall together. When you see this, you stop drowning and start flowing. There's no longer a winner or loser, just energy moving through awareness. Compassion arises naturally, not out of moral effort but out of clarity. You recognize yourself in both sides of every exchange. The game continues, but now you play it consciously, not as a pawn seeking survival, but as the ocean watching its own waves. The more deeply you look, the more you begin to see that manipulation isn't an invention of human cunning. It is an echo of nature itself. The universe moves through influence. Plants stretch towards sunlight, rivers carve through stone, gravity pulls, and magnetism seduces. Life is a field of forces shaping and being shaped. Every organism seeks advantage, expansion, continuation. The predator deceives the prey with stillness. The flower tempts the bee with color and scent, and the lover charms with beauty and promise. None of this is evil. It's simply the intelligence of survival playing its part. What we call manipulation is nature's conversation through form. But the difference between the awakened and the asleep is awareness. The unconscious being manipulates blindly, driven by hunger, fear, and desire. The conscious one observes these same impulses and turns them into instruments of understanding. When you see the pattern clearly, it loses its moral weight and becomes a revelation of how existence moves. You no longer condemn the game, you comprehend its necessity. Even your own instincts to persuade, to attract, to control, they are not flaws, but expressions of this deeper mechanism. The tragedy arises only when you act without seeing, when instinct replaces clarity. Awareness doesn't destroy manipulation. It transforms it into intelligence. You begin to influence consciously, not to dominate, but to align, not to extract, but to harmonize. Power becomes subtle, effortless, almost invisible, because it's no longer born from fear. In that state, you realize that nature itself is not manipulating you, it's awakening through you. Every interaction becomes an exchange of awareness, not a contest of control. To see this is to reconcile with the hidden order of existence, where every motion, even those that once frightened you, is simply life teaching itself through contrast. At first, freedom feels almost disorienting. You've spent your whole life reacting to invisible strings, adjusting your tone, your posture, your choices to meet expectations that were never yours. When those expectations fall away, there's silence, and that silence can be frightening. Without someone to impress, who are you? Without the mirror of approval, what image remains? The ego trembles here, because it has lived through reflection, not reality. It only knows how to exist as a response to others, praised, blamed, desired, or rejected. But as the noise quiets, something extraordinary happens. Beneath the constant need to please or defend, you discover a stillness that doesn't depend on anyone's gaze. It's not arrogance, it's clarity. You begin to act not out of fear or seduction, but from presence. You respond rather than react. Every gesture becomes deliberate, not rehearsed. You feel the subtle shift. Life stops being performance and becomes participation. There's a kind of lightness in this surrender, a relief that nothing has to be proved. You no longer seek validation because you see how empty the chase was, a hall of mirrors reflecting nothing. Real freedom isn't about escaping others, it's about no longer needing them to confirm your existence. The manipulator loses power not because you resist, but because you no longer provide the energy of resistance. There is nothing to hook, nothing to provoke. In that emptiness, you find a serenity the ego could never imagine, the joy of being unprovoked, untouched, unperformed. You stop living as an effect and start existing as awareness itself, spontaneous, effortless, quietly alive. It's a surrender that isn't weakness, but wisdom. You've ceased fighting for control because you've realized there was never anything to control, only the play of life unfolding perfectly on its own. Every manipulator, every system of control survives by distorting time. They whisper about what you did wrong in the past or what terrible thing might happen in the future. Guilt and fear are their currencies, and both exist only in imagination. The past is a ghost kept alive by your memory. The future is a mirage sustained by your anxiety. Between the two, your attention is split and a divided mind is easy to rule. But the present moment, this breath, this sound, this simple awareness, is beyond their reach. When you are fully here, they have nothing to pull. No hook of shame can catch you because you are not looking backward. No promise of reward can tempt you because you are not projecting forward. The manipulator's power collapses in the now because the now has no storyline. It is empty of psychological time, pure and silent. The mind, however, fears this emptiness. It clings to narrative, to continuity, because without them the ego cannot define itself. And so it drifts endlessly between what was and what could be, never daring to rest in what is. But the awakened one learns to live in this resting. Presence becomes the ultimate shield, not a defense built of resistance, but a space too vast for control to enter. When you are aware, fully rooted in the immediacy of perception, manipulation turns absurd. You see every attempt to provoke you as a movement through time. Remember what you owe me. Imagine what you might lose. Think of how you'll look. All of it evaporates when faced with the directness of now. Awareness is immune because it has no handle. It doesn't cling, it doesn't anticipate, it doesn't defend. It simply perceives. In that perception, the entire machinery of psychological control grinds to a halt. You realize that reality, as it unfolds, is untouched by fear or persuasion. The present moment asks for nothing, it just is. And in that simplicity, you discover the most radical freedom of all, to live unmanipulated, because you are finally here. When you finally see the entire game for what it is, a strange calm descends. You stop dividing life into enemies and allies, victims and villains. Everything simply becomes movement, waves rising and falling on the surface of awareness. You still feel the pull of emotion, but it no longer drags you beneath the current. Anger passes through you like thunder that echoes but doesn't stay. Flattery brushes your skin and fades before it can cling. Guilt knocks, but finds no one at home. You are still human, still sensitive, but your center no longer trembles. The world continues its noise, manipulation, praise, deception, desire, yet all of it flows through you as wind through open hands. Nothing sticks, because there is nothing left to defend. This is not numbness or apathy, it's clarity so profound that even pain becomes transparent. You no longer seek to block or fight emotion. You watch it arise and dissolve, knowing it belongs to the play, not to you. The observer within remains untouched. In that quiet observation, you find a serenity deeper than comfort, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances or validation. You become untouchable not because you've armored yourself, but because you've become permeable. Nothing stays long enough to wound you. The manipulator's tactics lose meaning because they depend on reaction, and reaction is no longer your language. You speak now in silence, a presence that neither resists nor obeys. Even the mind's chatter begins to soften in that stillness, like echoes fading in a vast cathedral. You realize that invulnerability isn't strength, it's transparency. When there's no fixed you to defend, there's nothing left to attack. This is emotional maturity, not control but understanding. Life moves, feelings rise, words strike, people act, but you remain the space through which everything happens. The peace you once chased was never outside. It was the watcher within, patiently waiting for you to see. Words can only point, they can never deliver. You could listen to 1,000 explanations of freedom and yet remain a prisoner of thought. The intellect collects definitions, while the spirit waits for direct experience. Manipulation ends not when you learn more theories about it, but when you begin to observe the subtle machinery within yourself. Every reaction, every tightening of the chest, every urge to defend or impress, these are the living traces of the spell. The secret isn't to escape them, but to see them. Observation is the dissolving force. The moment you watch your reaction without trying to change it, you've already stepped out of the hypnotic field. Awareness doesn't fight, it reveals. And revelation is liberation. You'll notice that what you once called you, the offended, the flattered, the anxious, is just a pattern of responses arising and fading. The true self, the one that observes, was never touched by any of it. That still, silent witness is the secret knowledge. It isn't learned, it's remembered. It's what remains when the mind stops performing. Once you taste that awareness, control loses all meaning. No one can manipulate consciousness itself because it has no hooks, no story, no need. It simply sees. That is the final irony. The knowledge you sought to protect you from manipulation was never information. It was perception. So stop trying to become free, and instead see what is happening right now without resistance. Every breath is an invitation. Every moment is a mirror. And when you meet life directly without fear or interpretation, you discover that you were never the puppet nor the puppeteer. You were always the space in which the whole play unfolds.